Monday, September 21st, 1942. Rain. The weather was bad as usual in the Solomons area. A competent air force attacked Port Moresby, but the result was not known. For some time, destroyers had provided transportation to Cominbo, the western tip of Guadalcanal. Tonight, however, enemy planes attacked them while they were unloading. This method is also dangerous on a moonlit night. Sneaking in by small landing craft should be carried out promptly. Tuesday, September 22nd, 1942. Rain. No special change observed in the war situation. The commander, 3rd Destroyer Squadron, temporarily suspended transportation on moonlit nights. The escort planning for the transportation of army reinforcements, which come from all places, the homeland, Korea, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Java, Sumatra, is very complicated. They appear to collect them, anything from anywhere, without any thought as to the bottleneck, the escorts. On Wednesday, September 23rd, the advance force and the task force arrived back, and their commanders-in-chief reported. Of the task force, Ugaki noted, "They just spent oil for nothing this time, but we should appreciate their hardships." Thursday, September 24, 1942. Fair. At 5:07, a ceremony was held facing north on the occasion of the autumnal equinox. I closed my eyes and prayed for the souls of my ancestors and of Tomoko. We had appropriate dishes for the occasion, but I could not feel like autumn in this heat. A new staff officer of the 17th Army came on his way to his new assignment in the afternoon, together with 2 staff officers of the Army General Staff. Had they exerted more effort like this a little earlier, there would never have been a failure like that. Friday, September 25th, 1942. Rain. Weather was still bad, and it was impossible to attack Guadalcanal. A trial landing was to take place today at the newly built airfield at Buin today, but it was not ready due to the rain the night before last, so fighters could not advance there. In the meantime, transportation on moonlit nights is risky. We must do something, otherwise transportation will be much delayed, so that commencement of the offensive will have to be postponed. A serious study should be made to find a way to attack through foul weather. Since this morning I have felt pain in my waist and slightly feverish. I hope I did not catch dengue fever or malaria while I stayed in Rabaul. Saturday, September 26, 1942. Light rain, later cloudy. Contrary to the fact that for some time we had been unable to attack the enemy on Guadalcanal, the enemy has been constantly active. 7 B-17s raided Shortland at about 9 this morning. Though the damage was slight, the situation demanded urgent attention, together with the damage sustained by light cruiser Ura the day before yesterday. On September 25, a B-17 hit one of the after turrets on light cruiser Ura. Meanwhile, the Chief of Staff, Southeast Area Fleet, requested a sortie of the support force because the enemy would probably raid the Shortland area. The radio intelligence section suggested that enemy radio activity similar to those noted prior to August 7th and before the Battle of the Solomons was observed. Something may happen. Setting aside refueling of the capital ships, aircraft carrier Zuikaku is not ready, though she will be ready tomorrow. It is admittedly one of the usual bad habits of this command that everything is planned on its own accord and is never prepared for an immediate sortie to meet the enemy. I warned the staff accordingly. Of course, training is important, but nothing could be more regrettable than if we should not be ready for an important matter bearing a great influence on the Guadalcanal operations after having advanced to this place. I-33, under repair alongside the repair ship Urakami Maru, sank at 9:23 due to an error of her key officers. What an incident. An accident to a submarine always discomfited Ugaki. In this case, to raise the bow, 2 of I-33's officers gave permission to open the cock of the after main tank, with the result that she sank from the stern in 2 minutes, taking with her 7 officers and 37 petty officers and men. Ugaki thought there might be a hope, albeit slim, to rescue some of the trapped sailors. It is significant, he noted, that this incident was in no way due to a construction fault of the sub, but entirely to a blunder committed by her officers. The next morning, Sunday, September 27, the senior staff officer of the 6th Fleet, Commander Midori Matsumura, reported that this hope must be abandoned. All they could do was try to salvage the sub. Ugaki appointed Rear Admiral Takayanagi, skipper of Yamamoto, and 2 staff officers as an investigating committee. The commander-in-chief was scheduled to see a native dance after an inspection ashore, but it was postponed on account of the accident. An air raid on Guadalcanal finally succeeded after a long time. I wonder how much damage they could inflict upon the enemy. Transportation to the island by means of destroyers and landing craft is going to be resumed from tonight. Moonlight still lasts, and I hope for success. In today's attack, they shot down several planes and bombed the airfield. Whoever reported these results to Ugaki was mistaken. The Japanese did not shoot down any United States planes at Guadalcanal on September 27, and in fact lost 9 of their own 53. Monday, September 28, 1942. Partly fair with squall. Staff Officer Watanabe, Commander Toshikazu Omae, 11th Air Fleet Staff, Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, Chief of the Operations Section, Army General Staff, and Hayashi of the 17th Army, arrived from Rabaul on a flying boat at about 15:30. They are having a conference on operations. The Army asserted that, in view of the failure of the Ichiki and Kawaguchi detachments' attempts, further reinforcements were necessary, and they could not be made unless 5 more high-speed transports were added. Whether these transports could reach their target would affect our aerial operations, movements of the support force, and a bombardment attempt by our Kirishima-class battleships. On the other hand, a delay in this transportation attempt would detain the start of our next offensive, as the attempt would have to be postponed for another month because of the lunar age. I think a daring attempt must be made even if some loss has to be anticipated on transports. Our attack planes engaged 36 enemy fighters over Guadalcanal today and seem to have shot down about 10 of them. However, a report from the garrison force on the island stated that 36 enemy aircraft took off 30 minutes before our attack, and the same number landed 25 minutes after the raid ended, and furthermore, 18 planes, of which 3 were B-17s, landed later. Regrettably, the report included our loss of 9 aircraft. The Japanese sent 62 planes over Guadalcanal on September 28th. The Americans shot down 1 fighter and 23 bombers. The Marines suffered no losses. Why is it that results reported by our attack force and the reported number of planes taking off and landing on the island did not coincide, and only our loss was great? An enemy submarine attacked the converted carrier Taiyo at a point about 40 miles south of the South Channel, and a torpedo hit her stern. She had been engaged in ferrying planes. She made 16 knots under her own power and entered port. 13 were dead or injured. This happened right after I was saying to Captain Seiho Arima of the 2nd Escort Force that we were glad to see that our loss due to submarine attacks had decreased lately. Her damage could be repaired at the 4th Repair Depot at Truk. Vice Admiral Nishizo Tsukahara, Commander-in-Chief, 11th Air Fleet, had been ill with dengue fever, malaria, and a stomach and intestinal ailment. The Navy Ministry suggested that he be relieved for recuperation, as operations in this area would be more intensified, and it would take some time before they were settled. Tuesday, September 29, 1942. Fair with squall. An air raid was carried out on Guadalcanal today. The enemy aircraft used to take off about 30 minutes before the raid and land soon after it was finished. They were in great numbers too. In view of this, we had to entertain some doubt about our flyers' claim of shooting down so many enemy planes. The daylight attack on that airfield now seems to be almost of no value. 12 B-17s attacked destroyer Akitsuki near Buka Island, while on her way down to the south to intensify anti-aircraft defense. But she displayed her value as an anti-aircraft purpose destroyer for the first time by shooting down one of them with no loss to herself. Wednesday, September 30th, 1942. Fair. Chiyoda arrived from Kura at 9, with 11 midget subs on board. According to the skipper who came to report, training and readiness of the craft were still insufficient. I can't help feeling that we called them down too soon, disregarding these points. We should not use them unless success is believed certain. Otherwise, judging from past experience, sacrifices would only be increased for nothing. I warned the staff accordingly and told them to let them keep on with their training for the time being. We did not carry out an attack on Guadalcanal today and spent the day in readying planes. Transportation by destroyers will be carried out from tomorrow, avoiding moonlit nights. Last night, a submarine on the patrol line sank an enemy transport of 7,000 tons, accompanied by a destroyer, sailing on course of 190 degrees. But she must have been on her way back after unloading, much to our regret. 2 planes, probably enemy, were sighted at a point 510 miles east of Tokyo on the patrol line last night. The 5th Fleet issued a warning signal, and the 21st Light Cruiser Division and 1st Destroyer Squadron sortied from Aomori Bay. Also, more than 10 enemy planes raided Kiska yesterday and inflicted damage upon a submarine and others. What's the enemy up to? I say, come on, we will show you. But I certainly would not like a surprise attack on the homeland at this juncture. In spite of a warning given by radio intelligence that something was going to happen in the Southeast Pacific in these few days, nothing special has taken place so far. That was also all the better. We received an advance notice from the Chief of the Personnel Bureau to the effect that, effective November 1, Vice Admiral Tsukahara would be appointed to the Naval General Staff and replaced by Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka. The Navy Ministry ordered the salvage of I-33, but Ugaki feared this would take quite some time, as only poor equipment for that purpose was in position. Ugaki also noted that the battle for Stalingrad, expected to fall by early midsummer, was not progressing well. Unless this city falls, the German operation will be upset. It is most essential for the Axis powers to capture it at any cost. Nor were things going well in North Africa, and the Allies had regained air and sea supremacy in the Mediterranean. It is now time for the Axis powers to get through this hard time, making the utmost efforts. Today, September is going to pass. Looking back, I find nothing has been accomplished this month. Guadalcanal continued to be the main Japanese preoccupation, so much so that their operational plans did not mention possible failure, because the campaign cannot be unsuccessful. But it could be, and was. By mid-December, the Japanese knew they would have to abandon Guadalcanal. Meanwhile, however, 3 more months of warfare, stubbornly and bravely waged on both sides, had to be fought. In related naval actions, Ugaki's area of primary interest, both lost heavily, but the Americans were able to land reinforcements regularly, while the Japanese experienced ever-increasing difficulty in reinforcing their troops on the island. Ugaki recorded historically valuable reports of many of these engagements, relying as he supposedly did upon reports of participants, especially naval aviators. These summations are highly optimistic from the Japanese point of view. Nevertheless, Ugaki was sufficiently realistic to record a worry over Japan's logistical situation. The fuel oil problem, always troublesome, was becoming acute. A shortage of shipping was reducing production of steel and aluminum. A large submarine returning from Europe with a cargo of new guns and spare parts struck a mine and sank. Then, too, the Japanese more and more would face the United States' overwhelming air power. Thus, Ugaki had to end his entries for 1942 on a pessimistic note, lamenting that Japan's plan for invasions on several fronts had been scattered like dreams. Chronic toothache, no respecter of rank, continued to give Ugaki pain, and no doubt contributed to his somewhat sour outlook during this period. Although Yamamoto authorized a sharp memorandum stressing the folly of encouraging skippers to go down with their ships, Ugaki still harked back with admiration to Yamaguchi's death, and expressed his desire for eventually an appropriate place to die. He was sedately pleased to be promoted to Vice Admiral as of November 1. Evidently he had been of some use to his country. Unfortunately, the diary for the first 3 months of 1943 is missing. Ugaki kept it for this period, and it remained intact until after the war. According to Rear Admiral Kameto Kuroshima, who was Yamamoto's and Ugaki's senior staff officer, he borrowed Ugaki's diary from one of the admiral's relatives when summoned as a witness to the military tribunal in Tokyo, and brought the portion in question with him. He claimed that on the way there, he lost it on the train. This is all the more regrettable as it would be of interest to have Ugaki's comments on the evacuation of Guadalcanal, when the Japanese took off some 11,000 men almost under the noses of the Americans, a feat as remarkable in its way as Dunkirk. Also, one would very much like to have one of his detailed reports on the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, where United States aircraft inflicted considerable damage on Japanese transports and destroyers. April 1943 was a busy and ultimately tragic month for Ugaki. The combined fleet flag had moved from Truk to Rabaul, arriving on April 2nd. The move was to enable Yamamoto to take personal charge of Aigo, Japan's sweeping plan for operations against the Allies. In mid-month, Ugaki came down with dengue fever. Unluckily for him, it abated in time for him to fly with Yamamoto on an inspection trip. On April 18, United States flyers ambushed both planes. Yamamoto and those with him were dead. Ugaki's plane crashed offshore and he survived, although wounded. Not until a year later, on April 18, 1944, did he record a detailed account of these happenings. Ugaki was transferred to the homeland for hospitalization and recuperation. He kept up his diary, but his son Hiromitsu refused permission to use the entries for this period when the diary was published in Japanese, claiming that they were purely personal and of no historical interest. Chihaya attempted to persuade Hiromitsu Ugaki's widow to allow us permission to publish these entries. However, she refused to go against her husband's wishes. Hence there is another, much longer, break in the diary until February 22, 1944, when once more Ugaki had an active role to play. Something of a lull in the Pacific War occurred until mid-June 1943, with both sides making plans and building up. The next step for the United States was New Georgia, with its strong air base at Munda. In related naval actions, all concerned lost valuable ships and men in battles featuring miserable American torpedoes and effective Japanese ones. Munda fell on August 6th, and shortly thereafter the Americans abandoned the island-hopping policy in favor of leapfrogging, that is, bypassing certain Japanese positions and leaving them to die on the vine. In November, Admiral Koga, Yamamoto's successor, moved the fleet back from Rabaul to Truk. October opened with Ugaki fretting over the salvage of I-33, not helped by controversy between the chief fleet engineer and captain shipbuilding Naosaburo Masukata, attached to the combined fleet. "It's outrageous that we cannot do anything about it after sinking a ship in our own base," Ugaki exploded. He resolved to salvage her with all the resources of the fleet, and also to ask assistance from the homeland. "Otherwise we will have no excuse to offer the Emperor and the victims." Friday, October 2, 1942. Fair with squall. It's gratifying that our aerial attacks have been successfully launched lately. In each sortie, our fighters are shooting down almost more than 10 enemy planes in dogfights. An enemy submarine United States ship Sturgeon sank Katsuragi Maru at a point southeast of Rabaul yesterday, and most of the crew, including the skipper, were saved. 3 enemy planes raided Rabaul before dawn this morning, and a bomb hit the stern of light cruiser Tenryu. 3 of the 4 destroyers engaged in last night's transportation attempt succeeded, while the remaining one had to turn back with rudder trouble, which developed while evading enemy planes. Transportation by small craft seems to be quite a difficult proposition. Kashima arrived in the fleet anchorage to participate in anti-aircraft training. I called in the Chief of Staff, 4th Fleet, and told him that the Commander-in-Chief, 4th Fleet, was assigned to salvage I-33. I also sent a request for some personnel to the High Command for that undertaking. Saturday, October 3rd, 1942. Fair with squall. The fighter attack on Guadalcanal succeeded again today. At 15:40, 20 enemy single-engine planes attacked Nashin, which left Shortland at 6:30 to transport Army heavy armament to Guadalcanal, but she proceeded without damage. I hope she will succeed in unloading at the scheduled time of from 21:30 to 23:30, because this outcome would greatly affect our future plan of bombarding the airfields and other locations. One of 3 torpedo planes raiding Shortland early that morning was shot down, and the Japanese captured a code book and some maps. Ugaki reflected that while their skill in torpedoing was not so good, their flying technique was better, for they had flown from Australia at night under a half-moon. He added, "They must be satisfied. As for them, it is quite honourable to be prisoners of war." Refuelling each ship of the main and support forces has been completed. Refuelling is a prerequisite to an operation, and yet, regrettably, it always tends to be delayed. The communications staff officer brought a draft plan for recapturing Guadalcanal. I ordered him to restudy it, as some points were still insufficient. This plan, too, depended largely on how to maintain refuelling. The 8th Fleet sent in the detailed schedule of the coming operations, made after consultation with the Army. This sort of thing should be decided first, as it is essential to decide the movement of our fleet by estimating the enemy movements. Staff Officer Muroy turned up today, as his dengue fever was not serious. Staff Officer Fuji got laid up with a cold and has not yet appeared at the table for 4 or 5 days. The staff seems to be a bit tired. I would like to give them some rest, but can't do anything here. Wait about 2 months more. Sunday, October 4th, 1942. Cloudy with occasional squalls. 27 fighters attacked Guadalcanal yesterday. Finding no enemy, one group of them started strafing when all of a sudden enemy Grummons swooped to attack them. Though several of them were shot down, our loss amounted to 9, including those missing. Last night, enemy planes attacked Nushin at the landing point. In spite of her damage by a near miss, the 2nd Division Command disembarked and unloaded 15-centimeter howitzers. She withdrew with a part of her load still on board. 10 enemy planes attacked her early this morning, but she arrived at Shortland safely without damage this time. The 2nd Aircraft Carrier Division left the inland sea for Truk. It's expected to arrive here on the 9th. Light cruiser Kitakami of the 9th Light Cruiser Division left for Shortland with Maizuru No. 4 Special Landing Party and others on board. I approved an operational order after some correction. There has been a slight trend toward a lack of carefulness and minuteness in planning of late. I cautioned myself that the Chief of Staff must never relax. Monday, October 5th, 1942. Same kind of weather as yesterday. 2 search planes lost contact in the southeast of the Solomons, one on its outgoing trip and another on its return way. Judging that they must have been downed by enemy fighters, and also that there was much possibility of an enemy task force operating in that area, the Southeast Area Fleet issued an order exclusively preparing for this enemy tomorrow. This command also ordered the 6th Fleet to carry out a search by submarines. What will be discovered? The fleet conducted training in spotting and identifying submerged submarines, with all the aircraft on the islands participating. Henceforth, wrote Ugaki hopefully, they cannot mistake whales and porpoises for submarines. That afternoon, the new Chief of Staff, 17th Army, Major General Shuichi Miyazaki, with Captain Nakase of the Navy Ministry, came to Yamamoto for briefing. Ugaki was favourably impressed. I only hope he will be all right in practice too. In the afternoon of Tuesday, October 6th, experimental firing of projectiles to be used in the coming operation was conducted. Wednesday, October 7th, 1942. Fair. Attacks by enemy planes and bombardments against our forces on Guadalcanal increased. Screening planes could not be sent today, so Nishin turned back from her halfway point. The airfield at Buin has been completed, but the forwarding of fighters there seems to have been delayed again. Everything tends to be delayed. It has become necessary to postpone X-Day to the 15th for landing and unloading the high-speed convoy. An enemy submarine torpedoed and sank Naminue Maru of an army convoy sailing from the Hiroshima area northwest of Rabaul. Naminue Maru probably fell victim to United States ship Sculpin, which torpedoed and sank a transport in that area on October 7, 1942. Vice Admiral Kusaka, newly appointed Commander-in-Chief, 11th Air Fleet, arrived here at 13:30 from Saipan by flying boat. An operations briefing was held from 14, gathering the important staff officers of the fleets. We then had dinner with each Commander-in-Chief. The briefing was over by 16:30. Chief of the Defense Construction Department of the Army and Party arrived here without notice. We decided to confer with him tomorrow. The High Command in Tokyo seems to be rather too sensitive in punishing commanders for their incapability in carrying out operations. After asking Commander-in-Chief Yamamoto's view on it, I wrote a letter to the Chief of the Personnel Bureau. The Commander-in-Chief's view is as follows. Whatever they did under my command is my responsibility as Commander-in-Chief. If they fail once, use them again, and they will surely succeed the next time. If we do not approve of the skipper surviving when his ship goes down after hard fighting, we shall not be able to carry through this war, which cannot be settled soon. There is no reason why we should discourage their survival, while we are encouraging the flyers to survive by means of parachute. In a war which must be carried out against tremendous odds, I, as Commander-in-Chief, could not help feeling reluctant in issuing orders if I had to ask our skippers not to return alive when their ships sink. Thinking of the resolution of Navy Minister Admiral Gonbei Yamamoto and the hardship endured by Admiral Togo at the time of the Russo-Japanese War, I am only trying not to be inferior to them. The Navy Minister has authority to decide personal affairs, while the Commander-in-Chief has the great responsibility of attaining the war aim and commanding the personnel thus appointed. Should there be any difference between the concepts of these two, in the end it would interfere with the Commander-in-Chief's leadership. The High Command should be cautious about their words and deeds. On Thursday, October 8th, Ugaki participated in a conference aboard Kashima with members of the Army and Navy Defense Inspection Team. The Army side fully understood the situation, wrote Ugaki, and it decided to send 5 or 6 divisions in addition to 25 battalions of engineers and others to the Pacific area. They all dined together, the team being due to fly to Kwajalein early the next morning. While sailing toward Guadalcanal, Nashin was attacked by more than a dozen enemy aircraft, including torpedo planes, but escaped from them owing to the good fighting of float plane fighters. 2 of them made forced landings at sea, but their crews were rescued. Transportation difficulties have reached their peak. In addition, the enemy started using the 150-centimeter searchlight set up at Cape Lunga since the 7th. A ground service unit, which advanced to the newly built airfield at Buin, reported that it was unfit for operations at this time, as half of the planes would be overturned due to the strip's soft surface. How weak-minded they are. This is the time when every difficulty should be overcome. Don't grumble, but try to use it by all means. The Buin base was completed roughly on October 25th, when some 40 fighter aircraft arrived. But the conditions of which Ugaki complained still prevailed. After every squall, about 10 planes daily would suffer damage due to skidding. The commander, 1st Submarine Squadron, Rear Admiral Shigeaki Yamazaki, is not in good health. The commander, 3rd Battleship Division Kurita, still has a slight fever. I hope they will take care of themselves and recover soon. On Friday, October 9, Tsukahara, slightly in better health, met Yamamoto ashore and inspected the salvage work on I-33. Kishi, commanding the 9th Light Cruiser Division, reported in person, and 8th Heavy Cruiser Division Commander Hara forwarded his views on the operational plan. The Commander-in-Chief has become slightly sensitive lately, asking about minor matters and also mentioning them carelessly. So I cautioned the staff not to worry him too much. The next operation is to be carried out with most of the combined fleet, and the Army is now seriously undertaking it. It cannot be unsuccessful, though there may be ups and downs. That was why we did not mention a case of failure in our operational plan. However, in order to ensure its absolute success, we still have some matters needing further study, so I ordered the staff to study them. Whatever happens, we must succeed in the coming operation of recapturing Guadalcanal at any cost. In fact, we are now pursuing the second plan to meet the worst situation envisaged in the operational plan, drawn up immediately after the enemy surprise attack on August 7th. If even this fails, what other plans can we make? It would mean the combined fleet would become incapable of doing anything. If so, the Commander-in-Chief's stand and my responsibility would face many difficulties. I am trying to be well prepared for that from now on. Saturday, October 10th, 1942. Fair. Yesterday's large-scale fighter attack on Guadalcanal had to return without seeing the enemy. They gave us the complete slip. It was quite natural for them. We should use a trick, a new tactic. Light cruiser Tatsuta and destroyers were attacked fiercely on their way back from the transportation mission this morning and sustained some damage. The 17th Army's Battle Command Post, which landed on Guadalcanal last night, ordered Shortland to hurriedly send only victuals and ammunition instead of troops, as the Kawaguchi detachment was starving. Such might be the situation. October 7th, 8th and 9th saw considerable fighting between United States Marines and Japanese on Guadalcanal. General Hyakutake, in command of the 17th Army, landed on the 9th to direct the campaign in person. Ugaki remarked that before he left Rabaul, he had drawn attention to the need for supplies. As transportation of personnel is much easier than that of equipment of material, those who participate in transportation are apt to transport troops only, neglecting the materials, ammunition and foodstuff actually needed at the front. Ugaki's teeth had been bothering him, and one had to be pulled that day. He asked for it, intending to leave it behind in case of my death. Sunday, October 11th, 1942. Fair. The 2nd Fleet plus the 2nd Aircraft Carrier Division left port at 13:30. The 3rd Fleet also sorted from the North Channel at 10. They were going to take positions for the next operation. I saw them off standing on the weather deck with the Commander-in-Chief. I pray for their sure success. We sent a telegram to the Chief of Staff, 17th Army, to the effect that the combined fleet set X-Day, the day after the convoy's arrival at the target, as the 15th and the advanced task forces sorted from Truk this morning. While we thus let them know our movements, at the same time we intended by it to prevent them from further delaying the land warfare. While refuelling a ship alongside her at Kavieng, tanker number 2, Tonan Maru, was attacked by an enemy submarine and took a torpedo hit. Both she and the ship under refueling managed to escape being sunk. We used two-wave tactics for the air raid on Guadalcanal today. At about 10:30, 18 fighters dashed in over there, but they failed to engage in air combat. It seemed to be the best chance, as a rain squall happened to come from the northeast, so that the enemy patrol planes would not be in the air. But seemingly they took off before our planes got there. The second wave, consisting of medium torpedo bombers and fighters, intended to launch an attack 1 hour after the first wave, but apparently failed to get there due to bad weather. It was most regrettable. On the other hand, about 10 enemy planes from Port Moresby braved the moonless night and raided our residential quarters with 70 bombs for the first time. 110 were dead or injured. The 11th Air Fleet asked for a reinforcement of fighters from the 3rd Fleet. We could not accept such a request to dispatch fighters from the very carriers which gallantly sorted only this morning. So we replied saying only, "Retaliate against the enemy by night attack." As the loss of float planes of the 11th Seaplane Tender Division added up and one of its tenders, Kunikawa Maru, also developed engine trouble, we issued an order releasing her from the task force's command last night. The search in the eastern area hitherto assigned to her was then reassigned to the task force's own search. The 6th Heavy Cruiser Division is going to break through to Cape Lunga to bombard the airfield tonight. I place expectations on its attempt. With the fleet anchorage almost empty, offering disadvantages for self-defense, Yamamoto, Mutsu, the 9th Light Cruiser Division, the repair ship Akash, and others moved to the south of Narushima after 12. Anglers were very pleased, and they lost no time in catching some fairly big ones. I wrote some letters after a long while. Monday, October 12, 1942. Fair. Leaving here yesterday on their way to bombard the airfield on Guadalcanal, the 6th Heavy Cruiser Division and destroyers Fubuki and Shirayuki encountered more than 3 enemy cruisers and several destroyers at 21:30 at a point about 18 miles west of Savo Island. In the ensuing night battle, they sank 1 heavy cruiser, seriously damaged an unidentified cruiser, and sank 1 light cruiser and a destroyer. On our side, heavy cruiser Furutaka was rendered unnavigable and finally sank at 23:30. A destroyer rescued 400 of her crew, while destroyer Fubuki was also sunk. Heavy cruiser Aoba lost contact for a while, causing us worry, but it was soon found that she could still make high speed, although damage sustained above her deck was fairly great. Its division commander, Rear Admiral Goto, was seriously wounded, so Aoba's skipper succeeded to the command this morning. Kinugasa, the 3rd ship of the line, appears to have fought valiantly. Actually, it was Captain Kikunori Kima, Goto's senior staff officer, who took over command. It seems to me that the enemy attempted a night attack with these surface craft upon our transportation attempts, considering their aerial attacks unable to prevent us. Nishin and Chitose succeeded in unloading at Guadalcanal and were returning safely via the southern course. But this morning, when they were still withdrawing, they were subjected to fierce enemy carrier plane attacks, with the result that destroyer Murakumo was disabled and destroyer Natsugumo sunk. This was the Battle of Cape Esperance. United States Task Force 64, under Rear Admiral Norman Scott, protecting a landing force under Turner, consisted of heavy cruisers San Francisco and Salt Lake City, light cruisers Boise and Helena, and 5 destroyers. It encountered Goto's 6th Cruiser Division, consisting of heavy cruisers Aoba, Kinugasa, and Furutaka, with destroyers Hatsuyuki and Fubuki. The Japanese lost Furutaka and Fubuki, while Aoba was damaged. Japan also lost Goto, who was mortally wounded. The United States lost only destroyer Duncan, with Fahrenholt and Boise seriously damaged. While this sea fight was going on, both sides accomplished their purpose. Japan's reinforcement group under Rear Admiral Takaichi Yoshima, in command of the 11th Carrier Division, landed 728 Army personnel, with a large stock of material, at Tasafaronga. Turner's 2 large transports and 8 destroyers managed to disembark the 164th Infantry Regiment of the American Division. Destroyers Shirayuki and Murakumo of Yoshima's command, having returned to the scene to rescue survivors, fell to Henderson Field's filters. On receipt of the first report of sighting the enemy last night, we ordered an early morning search by the land-based Air Force, while ordering the support force to proceed speedily to the south. The sudden encounter with the enemy gave me a shock, but I managed to get to bed finally at 2:30. A poor search should be blamed. Thus, our great expectation placed on a bombardment by the 6th Heavy Cruiser Division has come to naught. Our planes sortied early this morning to search for and attack the enemy task force, but they only found 2 cruisers, one of which was leaking oil and dead at sea. Though we ordered them attacked, our planes missed them due to poor weather. Only a part of them bombed the airfield on Guadalcanal. Meanwhile, one of our subs sighted 1 cruiser, 2 destroyers, and 1 transport heading north to southeast of that island. Though our neutralizing aerial attacks had not yet achieved much, and the requested bombardment by army guns had not yet been carried out, 4 transports were slated to leave Rabaul and 2 from Shortland tonight. We settled the landing date as the 15th. An all-out air attack was accordingly ordered for the 13th and a night bombardment by the 3rd Battleship Division on the following night, thus making our definite resolution clear. That afternoon, Major General Miyazaki, Chief of Staff, 17th Army, with the 11th Air Fleet's Captain Omai and Commander Genda, the latter the tactical genius of the Pearl Harbor Plan, reached Truk from Rabaul. They wanted a reinforcement convoy and a 3rd Battleship Division bombardment, and seemed quite relieved to hear that both had already been ordered. So they discussed future operations. Miyazaki would not go to the 17th Army command post, remaining instead at Rabaul for liaison. After the talks, he and Ugaki celebrated in advance of a success. Tuesday, October 13th, 1942. Partly fair with fair winds. At 8:30, a search plane sighted 1 carrier, 2 cruisers, and 2 destroyers heading southeast at a point 70 miles southeast of Rennell Island. After 12, 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, and 2 destroyers were found at a point 80 miles south of Stewart Island, on course of 2,800 at 16 knots. Carriers were feared to be accompanying them, but they were not sighted after all. These were probably the groups centering around Hornet and Washington, respectively, stationed for distant support of the Turner landing forces. Had they been somewhere nearby, the 3rd Battleship Division underway south would have been within effective range of an air raid until evening, but fortunately nothing happened. Besides these 2 large groups, 2 merchantmen, 1 destroyer, and several patrol boats were at longer roads, while a light cruiser was reported cruising west of Savo Island. We urged the absolute necessity of carrying through tonight's 3rd Battleship Division's bombardment by all means. In order to be prepared for a sudden meeting with an enemy, we also suggested dispatch of an element ahead of the force if necessary. These instructions were sent out because we hoped they wouldn't miss the main objective by sticking to small issues too much. The land-based Air Force attacked Guadalcanal on a large scale today. Most of the enemy planes were caught on the ground at the time of both the first and second wave attacks. They reported that attacks were effective since about 4 places were set on fire. After sunset today, the Army's 15-centimetre howitzers started bombardments with 2 guns for the first time, and 1 point was seen set afire. I think a chance of turning the tables has been grasped at last. It has been a long struggle and effort indeed. 2 waves of Japanese planes bombed Henderson Field, followed by the newly landed heavy field artillery that the Marines nicknamed Pistol Pete. The Dauntless Attack Force, consisting of the 3rd Battleship Division and 2nd Destroyer Squadron, succeeded in breaking through off Cape Lunga from the west of Savo Island after 21, without being found by enemy flying boats on their way. From 23:30, they carried out indirect firing of the main batteries with 3 lights lit ashore as the leading target. Both float planes and the observation post set on the island were used for spotting. Altogether, 920 projectiles were expended. During the firing, they maintained 19 knots. After completing the firing at 1, they withdrew at 28 knots via the north of Savo Island. Wednesday, October 14, 1942. Cloudy, cool. An unprecedented attempt to bombard an airfield at night with 14-inch guns attained a splendid result. The whole area of the airfield was turned into a mass conflagration of gigantic size with numerous flames shooting up. Induced explosions continued until dawn, and all this was done with no loss of our own. This proved that, if one dares to do a thing resolutely, one will succeed. Kurita's attack on Henderson was devastating. Of the 90 United States aircraft, only 35 fighters and 7 dive bombers were operational, and most of the aviation gas supply went up in flames. 41 men were dead. A night bombing on Guadalcanal was also carried out with 3 Type 96 medium torpedo bombers last night, 1 each in a run. We had long urged its need, but so far only in vain. Once inertia is overcome, a difficulty no longer proves insurmountable. A psychological reaction is really delicate. Early this morning, 1 fighter and several carrier bombers took off and landed again. Later, 20 carrier bombers arrived from the northeast, and their activities gradually became brisk. Last night's attack supposedly gave a serious blow to the enemy. 2/3 of more than 80 enemy planes originally observed at the field were believed destroyed, and the enemy seemed to be regrouping the remaining planes to meet us. Anyway, hoping to put the airfield out of use is a hope against hope. We should not be optimistic. As at 3 we thought the bombardment a success, we ordered the support force to advance southward and attack the enemy fleet. Ordering its supply force to hurry down south, the support force seemed to be approaching Guadalcanal. Thereupon we warned it not to come within 200 miles of it until the enemy task force was found, in view of Guadalcanal airfield still being used. This is an important point in using the bridle. While the task force was advancing southward, an enemy flying boat shadowed it, so it took evasive action to the northwest for a while. Then this evening the task force moved toward tomorrow morning's rendezvous point. Enemy planes discovered our 2nd and 3rd fleets today, but it was doubtful whether they also found the 2nd Aircraft Carrier Division. The enemy might have been surprised at sighting our large forces. They are not in the area within easy reach of our search planes. The enemy carrier groups were not seen anywhere today. The enemy sighted west of Rennell Island yesterday seemed to consist of 2 groups of almost the same strength. A Kitosi float plane, operating from Indispensable Shoal as its stepping base, sighted what looked like a carrier through a break in the clouds. A group including yesterday's battleship was only sighted at about 11 today, at a point 70 miles southeast of San Cristobal Island. Accordingly, an attack with the support force was impossible. The high-speed convoy, consisting of 4 Army and 2 Navy transports, concentrated at a point north of Isabel Island early this morning, and proceeded south under the escort of the 4th Destroyer Squadron with destroyer Akitsuki as its flagship. Though we had been pleased that the enemy did not discover it, about 20 enemy planes attacked it at 14. Fortunately, however, they escaped from them. I thought there would be another raid. Sure enough, the same number of planes attacked it before dusk, and this time the convoy got through the raid with slight damage. It reported back they would reach west of Savo Island at 20. Sunset was never awaited more anxiously. The weather in this area has been good these days, and today's air raid on Guadalcanal was also possible. Another attributable factor in protecting the convoy from enemy attacks was that all fighters from Buin and Buka bases, as well as float planes from Shortland and Rakata, could give air cover to the convoy. Heaven sides with us. In the evening we issued an order calling for the advance force to attack an enemy to the south of the Solomons, and the task force from the east to the southeast of the Solomons. However, each force had already issued its respective order to its command, so ours seemed to be a little late. Amid all this action, Ugaki worried about how to use Chiyoda's 6 midget submarines, and asked his staff to study the problem. Meanwhile, the commander, 3rd Destroyer Squadron, intended to use them at Lunga or Tulagi after unloading them near Savo Island. The combined fleet staff suggested spotting them between Guadalcanal and Russell Island to support unloading the convoy. Ugaki was dead set against either plan, and the fleet finally ordered them unloaded at Kaminbo Base for use only when especially needed according to the enemy situation. There had been remarkably little preparation before bringing them to the combat area, and it is no wonder that Ugaki was exasperated. Though consideration to giving them a chance to participate in a battle since they were brought down here can be appreciated, what I am afraid of most is that it will only result in belittling human lives and arms, and sending them a certain death, yet bringing no contribution to the outcome of the operation. Ugaki also objected to the idea of a special landing from a submarine on Espiritu Santo. The idea was not bad, but a reckless attempt without preparation and enough thought of success would not be encouraged by the Commander-in-Chief either. The most regrettable incident was the sinking of the submarine I-30. After the Indian Ocean operation, she was sent to Europe and, after sailing around South Africa, arrived safely at a German submarine base in France, where she delivered the documents and things entrusted to her. A big welcome given to her was made public in radio photos and announcements by Imperial headquarters. On her way back, she reached Singapore at 9:30 yesterday, the 13th. After finishing business, she left there for Yokosuka at 16, but she struck a mine at the end of the swept channel south of the commercial port and sank. All those aboard were rescued except about a dozen petty officers and men, but the new arms and parts which our Navy needed most were lost. Their transportation to our homeland was the main object of her being sent to Europe. After covering more than 80% of the whole trip, she met this disaster in our occupied port. Nothing could be more regrettable. I also felt my responsibility to the High Command, and especially to the German authorities for the loss. At least the arms on board her should be salvaged by all means. Seeing the great success of Bombardment by the 3rd Battleship Division, the commencement of Army artillery and the air raid, I thought that yesterday was an extraordinarily lucky day, but after all it was just a moderately lucky one. Captain Saiji Norimitsu, commanding the newly organized 61st Destroyer Division, consisting of anti-aircraft destroyers, arrived here on board destroyer Terutsuki and soon left for the south. Judging from the fighting of destroyer Akitsuki, I think these types are a success. 6 enemy torpedo boats from the direction of Tulagi attacked the 3rd Battleship Division during its bombardment last night. One of them fired a torpedo, but they were repulsed. On receipt of this report, we warned Chokai, flagship of Commander-in-Chief 8th Fleet Kinugasa, and others scheduled to bombard the airfield tonight. 4, not 6, PT boats were involved. They scored no hits, but bothered Kurita sufficiently enough that he withdrew. In any case, his ammunition was almost gone. It was gratifying that the convoy succeeded in sneaking safely into the anchorage at 22. Chokai's plane found an enemy cruiser at a point 5 miles bearing 310 degrees from Guadalcanal Island at 21:30. I wonder if tonight's bombardment will be possible. Chokai and Kinugasa fortunately succeeded in penetrating without meeting the enemy. They commenced firing at 23:40 and each expended about 400 rounds. 1 or 2 fires were observed, but the effect was not as great as the night before. This was only natural. According to United States records, 752 8-inch shells hit Henderson in this bombardment. Mikawa was present aboard Chokai. Thursday, October 15th, 1942. Cloudy. Since the convoy was undertaking unloading, at dawn we sent air cover over them with float planes, half of the fighters of the 2nd Aircraft Carrier Division, and then land-based fighters. However, about 20 enemy aircraft each came to attack them 3 times, at 1, 9:30, and at 11. Sasako Maru, Azuma-san Maru, and Kyushu Maru, 1 at each time, were hit, set afire, and went aground. Nankai Maru finished unloading in the forenoon and left the debarkation point accompanied by a destroyer. By 10 about 80% of the unloading was over. Thinking it would be risky to continue unloading after that, the 4th Destroyer Squadron Commander ordered the convoy to retire and resume the work at 17 after sunset. Despite the damage to the fuel supply at Henderson, enough had been stored in outlying locations to enable Army, Navy, and Marine planes to attack, grounding the 3 Maras, as Ugaki noted. In addition, Japan lost 12 bombers and 5 fighters. The United States lost 3 dive bombers and 4 fighters. In the meantime, the task force sailed south as far as east of Stewart Island and found a light cruiser and a 300-ton tugboat towing what looked like a floating dock, and 2 transports further south of them. A Chitose float plane later reported finding the same enemy. We ordered the task force to attack, but their attack planes had already left to do so. The distance between this enemy and the van force of the task force lessened in the afternoon, so we ordered him destroyed with suitable strength. The advance force also reached a point about 180 miles north-northeast of Guadalcanal and undertook direct screening of the convoy with fighters. It also searched for the enemy in the area south of the Solomons, but they did not find anything big, the same as the land-based Air Force. The enemy fleet seems to have withdrawn to the south. Since last night, the communications traffic between their units has been brisk. Our order to bombard the airfield tonight with suitable advance force strength was assigned to the 5th Heavy Cruiser Division, Heavy Cruiser Maya, and the 2nd Destroyer Squadron. They were going down south with commence firing scheduled at 22. At 16:30, we ordered the support force to come up north after these 2 groups finished their mission because they needed refueling. At about 12, an urgent report came in of enemy ships bombarding at Tarawa and Gilbert Island. At first, they reported the enemy to be a battleship or 3 cruisers, but it finally turned out to be a cruiser of the Augusta type, which came up from the south. After the bombardment, she recovered her plane and withdrew south again. Was it simply a diversion? It was not smart of him. There was no damage, and the 24th Air Flotilla had completed its preparations to attack. Heavy cruiser Aoba, damaged in the night battle of the 11th, entered port in the afternoon. The commander-in-chief left the ship at 14:35 and went on board Aoba to pay homage to the souls of Division Commander Rear Admiral Goto and others dead in action. After inspecting the damage, he returned aboard at 17. Judging from what I heard about the battle, they must have been extremely careless and unprepared. They never realized the enemy's existence until the 1st and 2nd ships received concentrated fire. Heavy cruiser Kinugasa fought almost alone. The commander-in-chief remarked, "I am confident of never losing this battle." His reasoning was that there were so many duds among the enemy shells. This is quite important and needs thorough study. At the same time, it is necessary to let the enemy know the reverse of the truth. At 18:42, the submarine I-3 sighted an enemy task force heading north at 20 knots at a point 165 miles, bearing 135 degrees of the Guadalcanal airfield at the eastern end of the deployed line. Though its strength was not known, it seemed to be fairly strong. Its distance from our van force of the 7th and 8th Heavy Cruiser Divisions, the flagship of the 10th Destroyer Squadron, and 4 destroyers was only 80 miles, so they should, of course, attempt a night attack upon this enemy. Otherwise, in case the enemy has carriers, our van force could not escape aerial attack tomorrow morning. On the other hand, should the enemy come up north in an aggressive action, it will offer the best chance for us to attack them. Accordingly, at 21:45 we ordered the task force and the advance force to search and attack the enemy in the area east of Stewart Island and from the northeast of Ontong Java Shoal, respectively. However, it was a nuisance that an enemy flying boat had been shadowing our task force since about 18. If they can evade it after the moon rises at 15, fortune will be with us. But we should be prepared anyway for an enemy preemptive air attack early tomorrow morning. It was later found by a report from a submarine that the above enemy consisted of several cruisers but no carriers. The van force of the task force could not launch search planes, maybe due to the rain. Apparently it gave up at 19 and withdrew to the north. The remaining 2 transports of the convoy were slated to resume unloading after sunset, but they turned and headed back to Shortland by order of the 1st Convoy Commander. Contrary to this, the 17th Army desired to send in a convoy of 4 inferior speed ships of 13 knots on the 18th, but we turned it down, as escorting is not easy, and also because of the schedule of fleet refueling. Friday, October 16, 1942, cloudy, 4 battleships, 2 cruisers, and several destroyers on course of 310 degrees were sighted between Indispensable Shoal and Espiritu Santo Island at 18 past 10. But we could do nothing about them. On the other hand, at 9, another enemy of 1 carrier, 3 cruisers, and 5 destroyers was sighted proceeding on course of 300 degrees at a point 60 miles south of the eastern tip of Guadalcanal. After 12, 9 carrier bombers of the land-based Air Force sorted from Buin escorted by fighters. Furthermore, 9 medium torpedo bombers started from Rabaul, but both of them failed to find this enemy, seemingly due to poor visibility. They only set an enemy tanker on fire on their way back. Thus, they missed this good chance of destroying the enemy. The reason the support force failed to attack both of those enemies is partly due to a difference of phase in which it and the enemy were acting. Another reason might be that he operated after suspecting our movements by thorough searches. However, when an opportunity arises, a fight will be touched off. It is essential to create such an opportunity. At 8:40, Captain Yonajiro Hisamun and Captain Tamotsu Araki, skippers of heavy cruiser Aoba and heavy cruiser Furutaka, respectively, came and I heard their reports alone. They gave me an account of the other day, saying that they were revenged for the battle off Tulagi. Though admittedly there was a need to complete preparations for bombarding the airfield, the search conducted in advance was insufficient. When they saw several ships to the west of Savo Island coming out of a rain squall, they thought them to be our Nassim and Chitose on transport duty and approached them. Forming a perfect letter T deployment to them, the enemy opened fire with several parachute flares. They concentrated their fires on Aoba, which steered to her starboard, sending repeated signals of "I am Aoba." Her fire-directing tower, turrets and bridge were disabled in a few minutes, and after firing only 7 rounds of the main battery, not to speak of torpedo firing, she turned back and withdrew, extending her smoke screen. The division commander, his 2 staff officers, and the executive officer of the ship were dead by the same dud which fell through the front. Furutaka was following Aoba at 1,500 meters. Astonished by parachute flares suddenly dropped overhead, she steered to port for a while, then to starboard. An enemy shell hit a torpedo tube, causing a big flame. Then the enemy rained their fire on her with this flame as a target. Number 3, turret and other torpedo tubes were disabled, and a shell penetrated into the engine room. Though one of the 4 engines was available, the water-feeding pipes of the boiler were damaged, making steam raising impossible, and the engines finally came to a stop. Then she listed gradually so that the ensign was pulled down and all hands ordered to abandon ship after 3 cheers for the Emperor. The Emperor's portrait was lost, as the bearer was dead. The skipper tried to commit self-annihilation in his cabin on the bridge, but both a revolver and sword had been taken away from him. Then he went up to the bridge to tie himself to the compass, but nothing was available there. The executive officer looked after the skipper. While the skipper was ordering the executive officer to leave him, the bridge sank into the water. When he floated again, he said he was somewhere near the bow. She must have sunk from the stern. Destroyer Shirayuki tried to rescue survivors by only starlight, but it did not get on well with the destroyer's small boats. Moreover, the survivors were scattered over a fairly big area of the dark sea. Fearing an attack by enemy planes the next morning, the skipper of the destroyer called off the rescue and withdrew. I felt most regret on this point. Furutaka fired only 30 rounds and did not fire any torpedoes. However, after the second salvo, major damage was said to have been inflicted on the 3rd ship of the enemy line. The casualties sustained were as follows: Aoba, dead, 79, 8 officers included. Furutaka, dead, 33, 2 officers included. Missing, 225, 16 officers included. Rescued, 518, 34 officers included. The surviving staff officers were aboard Chokai, and Tokyo announced that a new division commander would not be appointed for the time being. This caused a peculiar situation, as Ugaki expressed it. He understood Captain Araki's feelings and soothed him, saying that the conclusion of this war was far off and difficult to achieve, so he should further his efforts in the future to serve the fatherland. There seemed to be 1 or 2 more carriers and several destroyers besides the battleship and the carrier groups found today, and they can be considered the sum of the enemy fleet operating in this area. Unless this enemy is destroyed, the object of this operation will not be obtained. But the enemy was maneuvering all the time, keeping some distance from our force. This was because the enemy was making reasonable movements after adequate searches discovered our movements. We cannot, therefore, get him with conventional methods. It is most essential to outwit the enemy so as to join battle. Moreover, this must be done within 10 days. To that end, efforts should be made to create a chance of attack and take advantage of it. So I ordered the staff to study this. At 5:07, those aboard Yamamoto held a ceremony, this being the second day of the extraordinary festival of Yasukuni Shrine. Ugaki reflected that the number of souls enshrined there would be sharply increased by the sacrifices of this war. He also noted that this was the anniversary of the beginning of this diary. He expressed the opinion that his entries would be valuable materials in the future. Saturday, October 17th, 1942. Cloudy with squall. A ceremony was held at 5:07 on the occasion of the harvest festival. This year's rice harvest is expected to be 67 million koku and very good, with a 22% increase over last year's. However, we won't be able to give enough domestic-produced rice to everybody who wants it, and we will still have to rely on imported rice for not a small amount. Except for one cruiser and 2 destroyers off Lunga, today's search did not locate any enemy. These destroyers bombarded our landing point at Tassafaronga under aircraft spotting. As a result, ammunition transported there only after great hardship was set on fire. Induced explosions continue until noon. The loss was not slight. More caution should be taken. This was probably the bombardment by the destroyers Aaron Ward and Lardner which ignited Japanese ammunition dumps. The strength disposition for the general offensive was relayed from the Chief of Staff, 17th Army. Judging from the fact that the Army command post advanced from the beach, they seem to have recovered the left bank of the Matanikau River and made a further advance. Through the naval garrison force at Guadalcanal, they also requested a naval bombardment at about 13 on the day of the general offensive. The 8th Fleet also sent in a request to bombard with the 11th Battleship Division's large-caliber guns, just as the 3rd Battleship Division was employed the other day. Maybe because this operation started from the Navy's fault on the defence, the Army seems to depend on the Navy all the time and lacks the spirit of attaining the operational aim by themselves. Most of the requested personnel and material will have been transported by today's last attempt by naval vessels. They should not want too much, but try to attain the objective even at a sacrifice for the sake of saving their faces. Though the 2nd Aircraft Carrier Division's bombers failed to hit enemy destroyers off Lunga, the land-based Air Force's bomber attack sank one of them. The landing of today's transportation by naval vessels was completed through the northern route without being attacked by enemy planes. Sunday, October 18, 1942. Cloudy with rain squall. It was fortunate that the weather in the Solomons district continued good for more than a week, benefiting the progress of the operation. Bombing was possible both today and yesterday. We have been racking our brains these days to think of some plan to destroy the enemy fleet. The staff say they have no first-rate idea. While I was writing this, the torpedo staff officer brought in a report from our submarine, the 2nd from the west in the deployment line. It said that at 20 she sighted an enemy group of 1 battleship, 2 cruisers, and 3 destroyers just passing our deployment line on course of 60 degrees at 12 knots. The position was about 100 miles south of the eastern end of San Cristobal Island. The moon was on her 8th night, and visibility was fairly good. Thinking that they were ambushing the enemy, I waited for good news. Whenever there was an enemy battleship group, there was always a carrier group operating nearby. So we may see an enemy carrier group tomorrow morning, but both advance and task forces will be unable to make it, as it will be pretty far up in the north then. They cannot maneuver at will now, through fear of running short of fuel. Despite my request to the staff, we shall miss the enemy again this time, but it can't be helped. The tanker Kenyo Maru, attached to the advance force, arrived with an empty stomach. As she had no time to go back to the homeland to fill up with fuel, she took 4,500 tons each from Yamamoto and Mutsu, and some from Nishomaru. She will leave here tomorrow morning, heading for the rendezvous point with the advance force. In the afternoon, 2 more ships came alongside Yamamoto. Battleships turned into floating tanks. The oil consumption was so much that even the full operation of tankers was not enough. The fuel storage at the homeland is also running short, and a strict order to produce fuel oil has been issued to the oil-producing area in the south. The fact that we now possess those resource-rich districts is our strong point anyway, and because of this, we will not be beaten down. Monday, October 19, 1942. Fair. In spite of the efforts of submarines, they could not get a chance to attack yesterday's enemy. On the other hand, attack planes turned back from the halfway point due to bad weather today. No other information was obtained on the enemy. Only 2 or 3 destroyers were operating in the Tulagi area. The 19th Destroyer Division headed for Guadalcanal to carry the Chief of Staff, 17th Army, to that island and also bombard it afterward. Enemy planes attacked it on the way, and 1 destroyer turned back on account of a fuel leak. The Army's force, taking a roundabout route through the jungle, made better progress than expected and reached within 1 kilometre of the airfield on the 18th. At first it was reported able to commence the general attack on the 20th, but later it appeared to be changed to the 22nd. Well understanding the Navy's standpoint, the Chief of Staff, 17th Army, requested a definite answer about it, but so far no answer came in. So we decided on the 22nd as the date of the general attack and issued orders to the forces concerned. An advance notice of the new assignments, dated November 1, has been sent in piecemeal. I am to be promoted to Vice Admiral too. Though without much ambition, I am now going to be promoted to the rank of Vice Admiral on my own merits. I should be pleased with this as a proof of my worth to our country, shouldn't I? Tuesday, October 20th, 1942. Fair. During the night of the 18th, the Army's 2nd Division Command, both regimental commanders and others, completed their concentration at a valley on the upper reaches of the Lunga River. The Army commander accordingly sent the following message to the commanders-in-chief of all the fleets and the Chief of the Army General Staff. The time is now ripe for us to engage the enemy once for all, and this morning the Army ordered a general offensive commenced on the 22nd. We will fight gallantly and expect to respond to His Majesty's wishes by annihilating the enemy with 1 stroke. It was full of spirit. So we instructed all the operational forces that a night attack against the airfield was to be carried out on the 22nd. The 19th Destroyer Division could not reach the landing point last night due to persistent enemy attacks and turned back. I wonder what happened to the Army Chief of Staff. Today's search found enemy destroyers, then 3 battleships and 1 heavy cruiser, and others at a point 255 miles, bearing 145 degrees of Guadalcanal. A submarine also reported sighting a part of them. At about 1840, I-176 sighted 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, and several destroyers on course of 170 degrees at 20 knots at a point 120 miles southeast of the eastern tip of San Cristobal Island. At 19 past 15, she sent 2 torpedoes into a battleship of the Texas type. After 2 minutes, 2 loud sounds of induced explosions were heard, but she could not confirm the result due to a fierce attack by enemy destroyers. When she surfaced at 12:30 a.m., the enemy had disappeared, so she gave up further chase. The enemy may have escaped with heavy damage. I-176 hit the heavy cruiser Chester, not a battleship. Chester made it back to Norfolk for repairs.